Hello, listeners. Welcome back to another episode of Geopolitical Cousins. We had to drop last week for reasons that we explained in the podcast. Marko and I meant to spend 5 minutes on Russia, Ukraine, 5 minutes on the Middle East, and then the entire duration of the podcast on AI. We did okay. We spent 40 minutes on Russia, Ukraine, 10 minutes on the Middle East, and the rest about AI. We hope you enjoy the show. You can write to me at jacob@jacobshapiro.com if you have any questions, comments, concerns about the podcast. If you want to help us out, we've actually gotten a few emails about people. Do you want to help us out? Share the podcast widely. Share it with every single person you know. The more listeners we have, the more ratings we have, the more reviews we have, the more it helps us get it out there. So if you want to do something for us, if you like the content, just share it. Just share it with everybody that you know. Okay, take care of the people that you love, and I will see you out there. All right, listeners, cousins are back. We were off last week. I was Yom Kippur is the one day of the year where I go all in on my Judaism. Marko, you probably can relate to this. Like, I either have to do something all or nothing. So for 364 days of the year, I'm eating cheeseburgers. I'm your cultural curb your enthusiasm Jew. But on Yom Kippur, like we do everything. We fast. There's no electricity. We're wearing white. We're not wearing leather. Every single rule that there is, I'm doing it. So I was atoning for my sins. You were gallivanting around Germany during this time. Boy, is that poetic.
Yes, I was doing the opposite. I was doing, I think, Oktoberfest at some point there. So no fasting for me, that's for sure.
Were you talking about me there? Because on my LinkedIn, I got 3 different views from people in the German armed forces, by the way, while you were gone. It was a little bit disconcerting. I'm not gonna lie.
That's interesting. By the way, the fast during Yom Kippur is like 18 hours.
Oh, 25, baby. It's
a full, 25.
And it's no food, no water, like the whole 9 yards. Yeah.
Okay. All right, I respect that. Because I was going to say like 18 hours. That's what like all of West LA does. West LA does 18 hours every day. Like, I'm like, what is this? Well, okay, fine. 25 hours is legit.
Well, and it's the no food is easy. The no water is the tricky part. Like, you can't have any water. You can't even brush your teeth, technically. So if you really want to get serious. But anyway, people are not here for me to wax philosophical on Jewish fasting techniques. We're here to talk about geopolitics. The last time we talked, Marko, our last episode got actually quite a bit of momentum on some social media platforms. We were talking about our shared view that Russia is little more than a paper bear at this point, and really seems to be, I don't know, I think it's creating its own demise. Almost like on target or on schedule. Poland, about a week after our last podcast, there was news from Poland that they are preparing to amend their laws to allow military deployments abroad to shoot down Russian objects and Russian drones without prior NATO or EU approval. And probably listeners have noticed, like, haven't seen a whole lot of Russian drones or Russian incursions into these other places since our last podcast. So maybe they got the message. There's also been a steady drumbeat. I don't know if you've been following, like in the Atlantic or in some other articles. It's like the pendulum has swung now back to Ukraine is winning the war of attrition and Ukraine is pushing back. And maybe most concerning, if you're looking at Russia, the gasoline shortages in Russia are just proliferating all over the place. It started, some areas of Moscow and some areas in the coast. But if you look at a map of gasoline shortages in the country, it's just lighting up the entire country. And this is Slavic Saudi Arabia. Like, they should not be having any trouble getting gasoline to their people. But they're now even having trouble with that. So I don't know. Are you worried about, like, should we be moving up our timeline for like imminent Russian collapse? Is there anything you want to follow up on the last couple of weeks? Because it just looks like Russia is in a very difficult position, and that it's almost like Putin is reliving like early 1900 Russia, and not in a good way. It doesn't look like the emperor is going to have clothes for very much longer.
Putin's going to end up like Radichenko from Crimson Tide.
That's a deep cut.
That's a deep cut, I know. Crimson Tide, one of the truly best, I think, geopolitical movies out there. I mean, it all takes place inside a nuclear submarine. But there is this like backstory. There's this guy, Radichenko, who's like taking over in Russia. He's a nationalist leader, and he starts fueling his nukes, which is like the moment when the submarine gets the order to attack, to actually unleash its deadly payload. And of course, one of the greatest combination, Gene Hackman and Denzel Washington. I mean, it is just one of the greatest. I mean, if you don't go and rewatch that movie after my reference right now, you're not a fan of NBA basketball. Let me tell you that right now. But There's a great line in that movie that I'm not going to say. You're going to splice it into this so that I do not commit offense. And the line is,
You don't put on a condom unless you're gonna fuck.
the reason it's a great line is because the sailors, the officers on the submarine, they believe that this is go time and they have to execute the orders from Washington, D.C. But Radichenko actually, you know, wasn't going to fire those nukes. Whatever happens, it was a bluff. And I think that Putin is making this kind of a same error. I mean, like these drones in Poland, drones in Munich airport, which by the way, I flew in and out of like a couple of days before the airport was closed. These drones in Copenhagen. The problem is like, yeah, we get it. You have the ability to do this, but you're not doing anything with it. And all you do is you just look weak. You're either going to, you know, you're either going to do something or you're not. And I agree with you. I think this display of Russia's potential capabilities is just theater. And it's emboldening actually Europe and Ukraine to go harder. And the biggest issue, of course, is that, and I'm sure you're going to want to talk about this, but Ukraine is going very hard. And they're going very hard in a very sophisticated way. And I just want to spend a little bit of time explaining this to our listeners.
Yep.
There's effectively two pipelines with which Russia sends about 4 million barrels of oil to the rest of the world. One is in Novorossiysk in the Black Sea. The other one is in the Baltic Sea next to St. Petersburg. These two pipelines can easily be destroyed by the Ukrainians. They could easily cripple Russia's export potential, but they don't. Why? Because there's a more sophisticated way to do it, and that's attacking distillates. In effect, what the Ukrainians are doing is they're destroying Russia's refineries. Now, refineries are used to take crude oil and turn it into gasoline, kerosene, diesel. And that's the lifeblood of any economy, by the way, any. It's distillates, the things you create out of crude oil. You put that into a tractor to dig up potatoes. You put that into an airplane to fly it so you can like actually live in a country the size of Russia. I mean, if you can't fuel your airplanes, how are you going to get from Omsk to Moscow? You can't, unless you're going to sit on the train for like 4 days. So the point is that the Ukrainians could shut down exports of crude to the global market, but they don't want to do that. And they don't want to do that because they don't want to increase the price of oil. So instead, what they're doing is they're destroying the ability of Russia to fuel itself with these distillate products while actually increasing the supply of crude that Russia has for export. That's further depressing the price of crude. It is actually a brilliant strategy by Kiev. It's almost like they went to some commodity trading firm in Switzerland and asked them, like, hey, how do we cripple Russia? Because if I was in charge, I would have just said, like, hey, man, they got two pipelines to let's destroy them. Easy peasy. But no, it's much more sophisticated. And so the Ukrainian attacks are really painful. Russian economy is not as great as a lot of, like Twitter commentators think it is. They're running already an inflationary economy for a number of reasons. That's what war does to you. But if you actually shut down the lifeblood of that economy, the fuel that fuels the tractors in the fields and the combines, that fuels the airplanes, that fuels the buses and the trucks, inflation is going to skyrocket. So I think that we're approaching the end. And at this point, President Putin needs to either
put on a condom unless you're gonna fuck.
Well, yeah, he needs to make. I mean, there's two levels to this conversation too. There's the what is President Putin going to do? Because the trope about him is, oh, he can't afford to appear weak. He's gonna attack a NATO member, or he's gonna do tactical nukes, or he's gonna do something because he can't appear to be weak. And the second order part of the question that I wanted you ask, Marko, which dovetails with your trip to Europe, is everything that's happening with EU-Ukraine relations, because Ukraine, they want to be part of NATO. They also really want to be a part of the EU. And it seems like the EU wants Ukraine to be a part of the EU as well. The next stage in the accession process, though, is being blocked by Viktor Orban and Hungary, which is worried about Hungarian minorities inside of Ukraine, and they're using that as an excuse to block the next stage of accession negotiations. The Europeans themselves have also been very stern with the Ukrainians. They've said they have to eliminate corruption and follow the rule of law. Ukraine is even now not a place where like following the rule of law and like attacking corruption is anything that realistic. But there was also Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen, who was not on your top geopolitical power list, but was on mine. I'm just going to quote her for a second here from last Thursday. She and Denmark, by the way, is also holding the rotating EU presidency head, so that's why she's can say this right now. I'll quote her: "I will not allow one country, and I will certainly not allow Viktor Orban to take decisions upon the entire European future." End quote. It's a nice quote. I don't think Denmark's going to do anything about it, but I don't know. To take that either direction you want. I know we're going beyond 5 minutes, but I think let's bleed it into your European observations.
No, I think it's appropriate. Look, I think the tactical nuclear issue was a February, March, April, May, June, July 2022 issue. And so at this point, nobody believes the Russians that they will do it. The fear is gone. You've had 3 years of warfare during which you've had considerable setbacks for Russia, and you've never used it. So nobody believes you. It just is what it is. Is that smart? Well, it's just life. So for anybody listening to this and saying like, wow, that's dangerous, they could use tactical nukes. My answer is, well, yes, but this is how people get desensitized to risks. And I don't think it's inappropriate to say that after 3 years of warfare, Russia has not come close to using tactical nukes, and I don't think they will. The second issue is that, but again, it was appropriate to fear it in the first wave of the attack because it wasn't clear what Russia's intentions really were. The second concern was vast mobilization of Russia's vast population. We got one mobilization in December of 2022. Since then, President Putin has not mobilized, even though he really could have kind of used a human wave of 10 million men, armed with, doesn't matter at that point. You got 10 million dudes with like pitchforks. They will conquer some territory. It's difficult to deal with that. He's never done it. So what does that reveal? And this is how my constraint framework works. It's not just about constraints that I can give you. It's not like I can just tell you Russia doesn't have X. It's also sometimes constraints reveal themselves through behavior. And in this particular case, the constraint is that President Putin actually is not a dictator. He doesn't actually live in a dictatorship where he gets to do whatever he wants. There is a hesitancy within his decision-making that I think reveals that there are political constraints domestically, i.e. the population. I mean, he is afraid that 1 million people is going to march in Kremlin if he starts actually mobilizing the whole population. And so after 3 years of warfare, after not having mobilized again, after not having used tactical nukes, and after going to Alaska and revealing to President Trump that he really just wants the remaining villages of Donetsk, I think Europeans and Ukrainians have been emboldened by just a plethora of evidence that for Russia, this is a petty war. Putin is not trying to conquer Kiev. He's not trying to reconquer a sphere of influence in Eastern Europe. He's not trying to defend himself against some NATO encroachment thesis, which is clearly not true, because he hasn't said a single thing about Finland, really, in a serious matter. So really, this is just about domestic politics. It's about him trying to deflect domestic problems. It's about him trying to, show that he's tough. In that case, nobody really fears Russia anymore. And I think in a way, objectively speaking, it is an appropriate way to behave if you're Europe. And so what the West has done is it's told Ukraine, gloves are off. All the limits on Ukrainian targeting of Russian targets, of this, that, and the other, are off. Like, look, it's been 3 years. In a way, the West can look Putin in the eye and say, like, look, bro, we kind of gave you 3 years for you to do whatever you wanted. And we kind of told the Ukrainians to take it easy, to not attack you inside Russia. Whatever you've conquered in those 3 years, you've conquered. It's over now. And I think that is the message and the signal that Trump is sending to Putin. And as a retaliation, he flew some drones over Copenhagen, and he doesn't even have the temerity to admit it, which only makes him look even weaker.
Well, how does this end then? Do you think this ends with Putin making a deal? Do you think it ends with him being overthrown?
Well, I think it ends with both of those in probably that sequence. Deal first, then later overthrown. But I think In the near term, I think that Russia believes, wrongly and stupidly, that the winter offensive, when the ground of Ukraine and the mud is frozen, like they're going to do nothing. They're going to do what they've done over the past X amount of years. There's going to be a winter offensive that's going to end in like February, March. And I think that Putin is just hoping that this last final push gives him that last remaining bit, and I call it a bit because it's tiny, of Donetsk. And then he can go home and declare victory. I think that's what he's hoping. He wants another 6 months. And effectively, I think I've said this on our podcast before, I think he is really disappointed that the American election happened in November of 24. I think he would have hoped if it was like later, because he would have had more time. He just needs more time in his mind. So I think in the next 6 months, Putin is going to have to declare victory domestically. Like, hey, we won. We got all these territories and we can freeze the conflict now, because I think the longer it goes, the longer his economy is going to start suffering. Now, somebody on this podcast who likes to keep score and who's also an idiot is going to say, but Ukrainians are suffering more, which is an idiotic statement. War is not about who materially suffers more. It's not about material strength. It's not about who's powerful, whose economy is better, whose people are suffering more or less. War is quite often, if not always, about tolerance to pain, the willingness to incur risks, risk tolerance, if you will. And so, if you're listening to this and you're thinking your first go-to is like, well, Putin will unleash hell on Ukrainians. Ukrainians have been living in hell for 3 years. And he has unleashed it over the last 2 months. I mean, Russian air attacks have actually picked up massively. And Ukrainians fundamentally don't really care because they've been living in hell for 3 years. The question is, what is the Russian tolerance to risk? Why do you think Putin calls this a military, what does he call it? A special military operation?
Operation, yeah.
Why does he use that idiotic term? He uses it to create a sense in Russia that Russia is a great power. And like a great power like America, it can wage warfare with no impact on the wider economy and population. Like, for example, Americans had a war in Afghanistan, Iraq, and it was tra-la-la-la-la, like none of us feel it. Of course, the veterans felt it and so on. And in the end, even America felt it because it was $1 trillion wasted on nothing. But Russia's trying to pretend it's America. Like, we can have a war next door and you can still go into a supermarket in Moscow and pick up a great loaf of bread, as Tucker Carlson found out and admired. Like, oh my goodness, the bread is so good. It's like, hey, newsflash, Tucker, bread anywhere is better than in America. But let's leave that aside.
You should come to my house and see the things I'm doing with my sourdough starter, who is affectionately named
God,
Sally. Tucker, you useful idiot. I can give you bread that's nicer than what you got in Russia. I think they also call it a special military operation, though, because at least in Putin's mind, it's a civil conflict. It's a conflict in a zone that he considers part of Russia, and he doesn't want to say civil war because I think that opens up a whole Pandora's box that he doesn't want to deal with. So it's a special military operation because he doesn't recognize Ukrainian sovereignty. But I think we should just linger on this one. Yeah, go ahead.
Just to finish the point. The point is that Russians have been sort of conditioned to believe that this is not going to impact them greatly. And I think over the next couple of months, that's going to change. And so that's where the risk tolerance comes in. There is nothing that Putin can do to Ukrainians to make them want to end the war. They've already suffered. They're used to this. I mean, maybe nuking them, sure. But short of that.
Except nuking them, which is like one of the scenarios on the table is that Putin's mind is working the way that you're talking about, and he doesn't feel like he needs to declare mission accomplished. His move is, I have to be seen as strong again. How can I restore the vision of Russian strength and Russian deterrence? And the only thing he's got in his toolbox, as far as I can see, is nukes. But the other thing, I mean, it seems to me that based on what you said, that's an out there scenario. But it seems to me there are 4 scenarios based on the conversation that we're having. The first scenario is status quo continues, which I think you and I both agree. I think we're at the point where the status quo cannot continue. I think you and I would both be surprised if in 8 months we're talking about the exact same situation in Russia, Ukraine. But then the 3 scenarios are Putin makes a deal and it's mission accomplished, which I don't think markets have priced in. Putin gets replaced, but the regime sort of stays in charge. So the oligarchs get rid of Putin, blame everything on him, insert some other dictator or, first among equals that can be put in place, and Russia continues on and everything goes back to normal. Or Russian Revolution #3, and the people riot. And I think part of what you said, though, like you said, maybe Putin wants 6 months. If that's what he's thinking, I'm not sure he has 6 months based on the Ukrainian strategy that you just outlined. The gasoline shortages are happening now. And if the Ukrainians are going to continue pushing along the axes that they're pushing right now, they can cause a lot of pain going into the Russian winter that I don't know that Russia can metabolize. So.
Yeah, so I agree with you. I think that, first of all, I don't think it will be the oligarchs who replace Putin. I think that they've been neutered, and I think you were just searching for a term. I think you agree with me on that one. I think it would be the military. It would have to be someone with guns, because the oligarchs have truly been neutered, expelled, cajoled. But I think it is we're coming to that moment. And that's why that quote from Crimson Tide is so important. Like, it's put up or shut up time. And the fear of Russia is gone. And let me explain why. It's not just that Ukraine has held for 3 years, which has emboldened everyone else. It's like the little guy in a bar stood up to the big bully. Everyone else in the bar is like, come at me, bro.
Yeah.
But it's more than
Moldova, to your point, is like, like pro-EU, like, let's go in their last election.
And I mean, Transnistria, if you're right now in Transnistria, you are like shitting yourself. Because there's like two sides. You're squeezed right now. If you're like a pro-Russian dude in Transnistria, you're like looking for an exit, which is going to be difficult because you're stuck. But what I'm getting at on this issue is that it's not just that Russia has proven to be incapable on the field of battle. It's also that they've been incapable on the field of defining what this war is about. And this is why I go back to the Alaska summit, which was universally panned by liberal media and commentators. It was panned because it was seen as Trump rolling out the red carpet, which is idiotic because there were F-22s on the tarmac next to the red carpet. And, Trump has 99 problems, but creating good TV is not one of them. Like, he knows how to send signals and messages in a very sort of obvious way. And in the Alaska summit, Putin threw off all the bullshit notions for why he's in Ukraine. He didn't talk about denazifying Ukraine. He didn't talk about demilitarizing it. He didn't even talk about NATO incursions other than to say, like, hey, I don't want Ukraine in NATO. Yeah, we got that, bro. We've heard you. He didn't talk about, like, hey, man, Finland's next. He didn't say any of that. He just told Trump, honestly, objectively, hey, man, can I just have these villages in East Donetsk, in Northeast Donetsk? That's all he said. That was the conclusion. And so then Fareed Zakaria comes on TV and says, like, oh, this was terrible. This summit was idiotic. No, it wasn't. It was very important. Because Putin's honesty about what this war is now about is so petty. The rest of the West is like, man, screw you. No, you can't have these villages. Come and get it. You want to have a Russian winter offensive? Let's go, bro. While you're doing that, we're going to destroy every one of your refineries, and you're not going to be able to dig potatoes out of the ground to eat them. So have fun. Like, that's what this is about. This is about villages in Donetsk. So, like, there's two ways. And a lot of my clients, when I explain this, they're confused. They're like, but if it's just about northeastern Donetsk, why not just give it to him? Why not? Well, the reason you don't want to give it to him is because you have to fight for the price of peace. So you have to make it difficult on Russia to win this last remaining bit so that it's very clear to them that this is it. You're not going to, like, give up that little piece. And I mean, as long as Ukrainians obviously have the morale and the willingness to fight for it, why would the West just give Russia anything? So I think what happens is, come March, when that mud is no longer frozen, I think that Putin is going to have to, somehow twist all of this into a victory domestically and hope he survives. And maybe he can use repression, Jacob, and stay in power for a long time. And, that's obviously his prerogative. Good luck with that. I think the problem for Putin is going to be the same problem that Slobodan Milosevic had, or that anyone else had, which is that when the war is over, 12, 18 months after the peace is made, a lot of people are going to look around and say, wait, what was this for? What do I get from Donetsk and Donbas? And this is where there's a lot of useful idiots in the West, and not because they're useful to Russia, they're just idiots. But they're, but they're sitting around and they're reading idiotic blog posts about like minerals in Eastern Ukraine or rare earths or like neon gas. Remember the neon gas bullshit?
I do remember the neon
Yeah,
gas.
published by like serious investment banks. The point of all of that is that there is absolutely nothing in this part of Ukraine. You know how I know that? Because Ukrainian GDP per capita has trailed the rest of their Eastern European peers for the last 30 years. Guys, there's nothing in Eastern Ukraine except some coal mines, some metallurgical skill sets. Like, there's nothing here. And so 12, 18, 24 months after the war ends, the Russians are going to be like, so what do we get? Like, oh, is it like a lithium mine? Is there like, no, there's nothing, man. There's nothing. You got nothing. You conquered these territories in Ukraine and you got nothing except a hyperinflationary economy, over 1,000 tanks destroyed, over 300 fighter jets destroyed, over 1 million men dead or maimed. Like, and that's when the revolutions start. It's when when somebody does the math, when somebody looks at the ledger, looks at the Excel spreadsheet, presses equal sum, and gets like a negative, and they're like, oh, bro, this sucks. So yeah, that's where we're headed. And I don't know how you escape it. I don't know how you escape this,
It has to be mission accomplished and go back to things as normal. I love that you put on your Kevin Durant cape there. You're going after the blog boys. I expect you to be on burner accounts to all these different critical metals blogs that you're talking about, telling people how dumb they are. Before we move to the Middle East and our other topics of conversation, just give us a few minutes, Marko, on the second question, which is, do you think Ukraine joins the EU? And just what are your observations from Europe having just
I don't think the
there?
Ukrainians look. One of the things that you need to solve in order to enter the EU is you need to solve any territorial disputes. And so that's going to be an issue, I think. But for Ukraine, they don't have to become a member state of the EU. They just need access to European markets and investment. That's it. Do they really need, your point about corruption is interesting. I actually take a different side of that. I believe in this concept of garrison states. And I think garrison states are states that are surrounded by war and risk and occasionally actual direct conflict. But they're critical to the survivorship.
Survival.
Thank you. That was my operating system, just like breaking it down a little bit. So they're critical to the survival of a much, much more powerful country or state or a region. So when you think about West Germany, or when you think about South Korea, those are your garrison states. And in both cases, they were aided massively by access to markets, technology, and financing below market level. And so, did South Korea resolve corruption? Well, anybody who's invested in equities in South Korea knows that they've basically managed to kind of legalize and institutionalize what in the West we would effectively call corruption. Like, it's very, very difficult to know which company owns who, where the families who run Korea sit. Like, South Korean equity markets are definitely in need of structural reforms. Let's just put it that way.
And let me bring this down to the normal listener. Like, Parasite and Squid Game, like, there's a reason all that shit is set in South Korea. Like, that's the country that we're dealing with right now.
And yet it doesn't matter. It's the greatest economic development story of the 20th century. Period. End of story. You cannot assail that. There is no country that has actually performed better than South Korea on the planet. Like, it went from total collapse, one of the poorest countries in 1953, the Korean War, to like, holy crap, half of Netflix is Korean. My son is learning Korean. Like, and I'm like, why are you learning Korean, bro? He's like, Korea rules. I'm like, okay. So this is incredible what Korea has done. And it never really fixed that. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, money solves everything. It really does. Mm-hmm. Money solves everything. Here we can clip that great Ben Affleck line from Boiler Room. People who say money doesn't bring happiness, look at a smile on my face. Money solves everything. If you flood Ukraine with capital, yeah, there's going to still be corruption, but you're still going to make money. And so, yeah, I do think that Ukraine doesn't need EU membership. I don't know if that's necessary. It just needs to become a garrison state, a piece of geography relevant to the survival of the West is going to get flooded with capital. It's going to get flooded with access to markets and technology. And part of this also is that they've developed technologies themselves during this conflict. I mean, you and I have talked about this. Drone warfare is now made in Ukraine. And there's going to be a lot of VCs going over to Ukraine and buying stakes in various little private companies that are effectively focused on 21st century warfare, which Ukraine now like leads. So that's I'm super bullish Ukraine once the war stops. Ukraine will be the next South Korea. And it will still and again, it will remain somewhat corrupt. And that's fine. You know, it's not like we don't have corruption elsewhere.
Yeah, I guess the thing I wanted to add to that is just, I mean, and maybe the Europeans don't really want Ukraine in. Maybe this is part of the whole song and dance and dealing with Russia. But man, if the Europeans really do want Ukraine in the bloc, and if Hungary is what is stopping that, like,
oh no,
at what point? At what point do you say Hungary? Like, we're done here. Like, we would trade Ukraine for Hungary.
No, I mean, there's this inflated view in the West of Viktor Orban. Dude runs a country with 10 million people, man. Let's settle down. You know, like if you're trying to win a water polo tournament, man, Hungary is relevant. Otherwise, like, you know, no offense to the Hungarian listeners, man. I'm from Serbia. You guys are, you know, bigger than Serbia, but like, settle down.
Well, my point is just that the EU has to put its big boy pants on. Like, it can't keep on having Hungary misdirect its policies at this level.
But I don't
going
think
forward.
Look, I don't think Hungary is misdirecting policies. You know, like it imports oil from Russia. I mean, you know, like on some level, Hungary, Slovakia need some oil. That's fine. Probably some of that oil ends up in Western markets too. So there's like a little hush hush. What's up? Like, let's just, you know, like, yeah, let's let that nationalist Orban get Russian oil. And then the Russian oil ends up in a BMW in Germany. Who knows? Who knows? I just think that anyone listening to this who actually believes that countries have veto in the EU or NATO, like that's actually not true. Montenegro is a member of NATO. Montenegro has 500,000 people. They're not NATOing. They're not vetoing anything, you know? And God bless Montenegro.
They're also
too.
not NATOing anything.
Like, nobody cares what Hungary actually thinks. By the way, Victor, if Come at us. Tell us why you matter. Come on our show.
Yeah. Cast your shadow over the Cousins podcast and tell us what we're missing.
Nobody cares.
Okay.
Listen, about one other thing. I was just in Europe, and I know you want some. I will tell you that Putin is really making a big mistake. He thinks there's a lot of cleavage in Europe on the question of Ukraine. And there kind of was. You know, there were parties, there were political parties, there were, I don't want to say pro-Russian, that's way too simple, but they were like, look, man, we don't care about Donetsk. Why are we suffering because of Donetsk? Like, we understand Ukrainians care, we don't. And so Putin's like smartly played that cleavage in Europe. And by the way, that cleavage obviously exists in the US as well. The problem is that when you start flying drones, you know, and you've got half of Europe is in Munich and drunk or hungover. And you can't get back to like Bratislava now, you know, and you were kind of on the Russian side, but now you're hungover. You don't know where, like you've lost your wallet. Okay. You're already stressed because it's somewhere in one of the tents. You don't know how you explain to your wife that you also magically lost your wedding ring. It just slipped while you were in Munich. So you're super stressed in the line, and suddenly Russian drones force flights to be on the ground. You know, like at that point, you're like, man, fuck you, Putin. You know, like I'm tired. I'm hungover. I just want to get home. And this is where I think Putin is overplaying his hand. He thinks that these drone things are going to divide Europeans further. They're actually uniting them. And again, the reason for this is that it's been 3 years. The West has effectively limited its support of Ukraine in one way or another. And you haven't been able to conquer this. Nobody has any more patience for Russian demands because they are petty. And he's uniting Europe. And that was the sentiment I got from talking to over 300 clients in finance who have there's always been a little bit of like a sympathy for Russia, empathy. Like we understand, you know, they got pushed around. So like they got to Now there's no more sympathy or empathy. Everyone's just like, man, you know what? Yeah, fly a fighter jet into airspace again. Do it.
And see what happens. Yeah. All right. We said we were going to do 5 minutes on that. We did 35. Let's do a proper 7 on the Middle East, and then let's move to AI, which is the thing that we wanted to talk about most in depth. I don't even really want to talk about some of it. I mean, some of it's important. Like, we can talk about Gaza, Gaza Lago, Mara Gaza, whatever they're going to call it, the Trump redevelopment of Gaza. We could talk about that. But since our last podcast, I mean, there have been a few things that have happened. There's the Saudi Arabia-Pakistan mutual defense arrangement, which is not uninteresting. There's the White House executive order basically guaranteeing Qatar's security, which doesn't sound very America first to me. The United States committing to defending another is Qatar the next garrison state inside the Middle East. I also noted to you, nobody's talking about Iran anymore. Where did Iran go? Did they just get blown off the map? Like, they're not in the news. The Saudis are pumping oil like nobody's business because they're stealing market share. We're going back to sort of March 2020, right before the pandemic, when they were doing this to Russia before, and they're doing it with Trump's blessing. That's not going to fix electricity prices in the United States, by the way, but like, it's happening. And then there's also, I mean, Morocco is a country that you had high on your geopolitical power list.
I did, yeah.
Marko. And they've had some protests lately. Protests big enough for Bloomberg to describe them as the most serious wave of unrest since the Arab Spring. I think that's a little bit much. But there have been a lot of protests in Marko. There's this tech group, their leader list. They're called Gen Z 212. They're fueling demonstrators' anger about profligate spending on the 2030 World Cup, as they say, at the expense of the health and education of normal Moroccan citizens. There's also, like, if you look at the map, like, where unrest is popping up. We don't have to go into all this, but I mean, from Morocco to Indonesia, you can find some of these things popping up. And I also just wanted to say, like, this doesn't have to feature into the conversation in a huge way, but FT had a great chart about time spent on social media since 2022. And basically, if you're the ages from 16 to about 44, your time on social media has begun to decline. But 55 to 64 and older, their time is increasing. So if you're wondering why social media sucks, it's because the boomers are invading social media, and the young people are so sick and tired of it. They're like, oh my God, I'd rather go protest in the streets of Rabat than deal with X for another minute longer. Anyway, anything you want to say about the Middle East? There are some confusing things in there. I think it's probably just more of the same, but it is a lot of moving parts.
Well, I think the Gen Z thing is probably worthy of a whole new podcast. I don't think we can really tie that to just Morocco. To be fair to Morocco, like this, as you pointed out, happened in Indonesia. It's actually been happening in Serbia for the past 18 months. So Serbia was the first country in the world that really experienced like repeated nonstop Gen Z protesting, and it's over very similar issues as in Morocco. People in the West try to paint all this into liberal, conservative, European, Russian kind of like things. No, that's nothing to do with that. It's about like corruption. It's just about quality of life issues. And the way I explained it, when somebody asked, I think maybe even on this podcast, somebody, you might have brought it up in one of our earlier episodes, like, hey, what's going on in Serbia? And look, I don't exactly follow my homeland unless it's like basketball. But what I will define it as is that a long period of stability and wealth creation, to be fair to the Serbian government and Moroccan government, a long period of stability, like geopolitical stability and wealth creation, that is not accompanied by improvement of governance and institutions, creates a mismatch, particularly when the young people have access to social media and they can see how things work elsewhere. So you've got, and especially, when we criticize a lot the quality of life in the US or governance quality in the US, or, you hear people obviously talk bad about Europe being sclerotic, a museum, all this stuff. But if you're a young person in Morocco or Serbia and you travel to like Italy, which isn't exactly a paragon of like governance quality, but you go there and you see that stuff kind of works. And you go back home, you're like, but why can't we be at least like Portugal? Why can't we be at least like Italy? And it's that, and this is where I think Morocco and Serbia, and to an extent Indonesia, all of these places are victims actually of their success. Over the last 10, 15 years, they have been improving. They've been stable. They haven't had civil wars or conflicts or social unrest. As you pointed out, Morocco avoided much of Arab Spring. Serbia has not invaded or fought a war in the last, I'm checking the date here, 26 years, which is like a quarter century, man, without war. That's a record for Serbia. So like, and then
Mazel.
Indonesia, yeah, thank you. Indonesia under Joko Widodo really was kind of moving in the right direction. And so what happens is you create a new expectation of the population who also has access to social media and travel and can find out what it's like somewhere else. And I think that's what's happening. And Gen Z, I just think they were raised by first person shooter games. So they're, they just don't give a fuck.
I guess so.
So I did not answer anything about the Middle East.
About the Middle East? No, you gave a very, very good explanation. I mean, I think you're right. We should do a whole episode on the Gen Z protests because
we should have my daughter on. There we go. She can be our it can be a parent corner.
Yeah. I'll have my 3-year-old on. Hello, you're not even in Gen Z. What generation are you going to be in? She's going to say Generation Magic Rock or something.
She's Alpha or Beta, and they will end the planet because they were raised by really, really scary YouTube shorts. But Gen Z is different. People talk about Gen Z stare. They talk about a lot of different things that we can spend a whole hour on. And I think that they it's interesting. You look at generations, right? Did you know that we haven't? Okay, let me ask you this question, Jacob. I'm very excited about this. Okay. Right. What do Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Donald Trump have in common? It's not anything to do with Epstein. Let's just leave that aside, please.
I didn't think George W. Bush had anything to do with Epstein. I mean, my instinct is that they're all roughly in the same generation. But so Donald's pretty old.
Not only are you right, not only are you correct, but they were born in the same year, 1946.
Same year. I mean, my dad has passed away a couple years ago. Same year that my dad was born. By the way, the idea that people who are the same age as my father are governing the country is wild.
Since 1992, Jacob. Okay, so if you're listening to this podcast and you're American, you should proceed to douse yourself in gasoline. Because it's embarrassing.
Did you hear about Clinton's new memoir that's coming out?
Oh no, I did not.
It's called 8 Years of Sex Between the Bushes. Anyway, sorry. Go on.
But yeah, so basically since 1992, America has been run by baby boomers. Okay, except for a brief period of time, and by the way, Barack Obama was also a baby boomer, the youngest, one of the youngest ones, except for a 4-year period during which a Gen Xer oh no, I'm sorry, I'm lying. Except for the 4 years where we chose someone older than a baby boomer, which is Joe Biden. And so what am I getting at? I'm getting at 2 points. First of all, OMG, that is pathetic. However you look at it. And the second thing that I want to point out is that there are generations that just will never get their turn, ever. I think Gen X is never going to get their turn. Newsom is Gen X, and that tells you everything about Gen X. Let's leave it aside. But the point is that I actually think millennials are going to we're going to get like one president, and then Gen Z is just going to kill us all and use our bodily fluids for fuel because they just don't give a fuck. They were born, in this dystopian future where, you're not going to get wealthier than your parents. You know that AI is going to take your job. And then you see wanton corruption and perversion of institutions, and you see it all on social media, and you've got savvy. And I think that they're just going to, my forecast is that we're going to skip generations. Gen X is never going to be in power, ever. Sorry, guys. You're too small. Nobody cares about your Nirvana MTV world. Bye. And then millennials, we're probably going to get the next president because I feel that that's what's coming. J.D. Vance, by the way, shut up. He is a millennial. Whether you like him or not, at least he's not 750 years old, like Schmaug from Hobbit. And so, and then after this, and then that's it. We're going to get one 4-year term us millennials, and then Gen Z is going to come and just eat us alive. That's my forecast.
That's a good hot take. I don't know if I agree with that, but I'm going to sit with that for a bit, and we'll do a larger Gen Z unrest thing.
Okay,
do you want to say anything about the Middle East before we leave it?
Look, you know what I'm going to say about Middle East? Gaza is just, it's a complete mess. Obviously, by the way, just so our listeners know, this isn't just me being unenthusiastic. You should have seen the email from Jacob to me before he's like, hey, I guess we should talk about Gaza, but I don't want to. And I don't want to either. Garrison state comment you made about Qatar.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I want to talk about that just for a second. I think UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, even Saudi Arabia are garrison states. We've had 2 years of war. Today is 2-year anniversary. It's October 7th, so 2-year anniversary.
Today is October 7th. Wow.
Yeah. We know you suck as a Jew. You've already explained that.
I atoned for it last week. I'm good. Don't worry.
So yeah, it's a 2-year anniversary of one of the worst terrorist attacks ever.
Ever.
Okay, so in those 2 years, what has befallen? We know what's happened to Israel. We know what's happened to Palestinians. We know what's happened to Iran. And then Qatar got bombed like by Israel. And Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu was forced by Trump to call the Emir of Qatar from the White House, which is the most embarrassing thing it was basically like, no, baby, you're going to call him right now. No, I'll call him when I get back to Jerusalem. No, you're going to call him right now.
I also just want to say, this is a recurring theme for Netanyahu, because it's like every single president except Joe Biden makes him do this, because Obama did the same thing to Netanyahu with Erdogan. He was like, no, we're calling Erdogan and we're apologizing for the flotilla
for what?
Now, because I'm done with Israel and Turkey squabbling with each other. So
I forgot about that. I totally forgot about that flotilla thing. You're right. Look, the point of all of this is that when you look at the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, the Gulf countries, they've come out of this completely unscathed. Nobody has moved out of Dubai or Abu Dhabi. None of the expats, none of the financial center. Saudi Arabia, the market is the worst performing stock market, I think, in the world this year. But that's not related to what's happening with Iran and Israel, because they were also up.
Oil.
It's oil prices. Yeah. So my point of all self-inflicted, you could say, also it has to do with, I think, them not allowing enough corporate governance, which they're trying to shift now because they've realized that. But the point of all of this is that you're absolutely right to point out and use the garrison state term. I think that the Gulf countries have proven themselves over the last 2 years, since October 7, 2023, that they're actually stable and actually more secure than you think. So that's my hot take. My hot take here is that you and I have nothing else left in us to talk about Gaza and Israel. Or Iran, what's happening to poor Iran, who's just left there? Nobody cares. It's laughed at.
Yeah.
And the winner, the big winner, is the Gulf economies. They're crushing it, and they're crushing it because the region is in flames. And I'm telling you, most Westerners don't think the way I do, because they're biased and because they paint the entire Middle East with the same tired Islamophobic brush that they've been using for the past 24 years. And the region, it's a quarter century. The region has had the most actually socio-economic, religious, cultural reformation on the planet.
All right. Let's that was good. And we'll come back to Gen Z, I think, on our next podcast.
Think so.
I think that's a topic we need to do some serious work at, besides just throwing things at each other. Okay, so AI. There is a piece written by Jerry Newman, who's a retired VC. He's a sharp thinker on innovation cycles. It's titled AI Will Not Make You Rich. We'll have a link to it in the show notes. He might even be coming. I actually reached out to him, Marko. He might come on the show to talk to us, or maybe he'll come on my podcast. We'll figure it out.
Let's do it on the Cousins. Let's do it on Cousins, so that we can all Cousins. It's gonna be a bear fest in AI.
Yeah. Well, I'll try to be the bull then, because I have to be a contrarian. But the argument of his piece, and we'll get into it though, is that AI is transformative, basically, but it's not revolutionary. And he makes two different, not comparisons. I guess they are comparisons actually. He compares AI to the microprocessor and the revolution that was the microprocessor, and he says, actually, this is not the AI is not similar to the microprocessor. This is actually the maturation of that technological revolution. It's really much more like the invention of containerization, container shipping, something that also completely reshapes the global economy, but that mostly makes everybody else richer. Like he even says in the piece, like there's basically two companies and one guy who made some money off of containerization, and that was it. Like you didn't have investors lining their pockets because they figured out containerization and were able to go in a different direction. It wasn't the people building the ships that made all the money. And so, I mean, his piece is basically saying, yes, AI is going to change everything, but not for all the investors and entrepreneurs that are piling into it, that the value is going to accrue downstream to the businesses, the societies, the nation states that use AI effectively and not the ones that invent it. And first of all, I think it's a really novel way of thinking about this. It's the best thing I've read this year. It stopped me in my tracks. Second of all, I think you can probably attest to this, Marko. This is in the zeitgeist, not just with my clients. I mean, I was literally just this morning chatting with a good friend of mine, and he was talking about, man, like he has two daughters just like I do. What are my daughters going to study in school so that when they have jobs, like they're going to actually make money? Because they can't be lawyers, they can't be this, they can't be that. Maybe they can't even be doctors. AI is coming for everything. He was like kind of spinning out about that. So I think people are thinking about this in that really deep, meaningful way. I think there's a whole discussion we could go to on the microprocessor versus containerization metaphor, which also has a lot of geopolitics embedded into it. And I think it does have direct implications for, I mean, not just markets and capital allocation, but for national power, for productivity, for what countries are going to do the best going forward. It's when we go back to our geopolitical power index that we did earlier this year and we revisit it next year. One of the reasons we had some spots carved out for city states were because actually the smaller the state, the more easily they'll be able to roll out some of these AI advances, because you can't do it on a huge scale across the United States. But in Singapore, you can do it. In the UAE, to your point about garrison states, like you can do it in a really meaningful way and get those productivity gains in a way that it's not going to work for national economies. Anyway, that's my preamble. You take it from there. What do you want to dive into first here?
I read the piece and it fully aligns with what I've been telling clients for the past 2 years. Jacob and I have real jobs in the world. This is just banter for those of you who are joining us kind of late. Both of us work in the same industry, finance. I speak to a lot of long-term investors who care about where the markets are going, beyond the next 6 months. And the big question is, what are the winners? What are the losers of AI? And I've used a very similar analogy to the brilliant essay that you pointed out. I use railroads. Mm-hmm. It was also a transformative technology, but you didn't really make money over the long term in railroads. Railroads were high capex, high capital cost companies. They had to build all this infrastructure, and so they ended up, churning through, being very capital heavy businesses. And one of the benefits of investing in American tech companies has been that they're capital light companies. I can't tell you how many allocators around the world working in illiquids, alternatives, would just tell me, look, Marko, like I don't want to invest anywhere in the world because I can give some kid who dropped out of Palo Alto enough money for rent and weed, and boom, like they're going to use the weed to fuel their coding and rent to live somewhere in Palo Alto, and done. I don't need to build factories. I don't need to invest in a prototype. I don't need to invest in like some 46-year-old engineer who costs millions of dollars, who has kids in private school. Just a dropout out of Stanford, weed for the bong, rent, done, end of story. And whoops, that's not the American tech industry anymore. Now, the American tech industry, first of all, some of these engineers cost like billions of dollars because they're so, like, they are like that 43-year-old engineer that my clients didn't want to invest in. Second of all, you do need incredible amount of capital and capex. So these are not capital light companies anymore. This is a completely different business model. And that makes the hyperscalers who are building the infrastructure railroad companies. They are, in a way, taking all the risk because we know what's going to happen. This is God's law. This was like when Moses dropped the tablets. This was the part that was destroyed, was like, capex cycles will end in tears. That was like one of the commandments from God.
The 11th commandment. The often forgotten 11th commandment.
Like this is what Moses dropped, like a whole series of other commandments that would have made trading a lot easier because God was a day trader. And one of the things, And one of the things is every single time that you invest in infrastructure, what's going to happen is you're going to overbuild that infrastructure, whether it's the canals, of the 18th century, whether it's the railroads and the telegraph of the 19th century, whether it's the big tech, 1990s, whatever it is, we're going to overbuild. And so all the risk is borne by the hyperscalers. But when they inevitably get impacted by overbuilding of this capex, and when we realize we don't necessarily need all these data centers anyways, for a number of reasons we can go into, the winners are going to be the companies that are going to use it. So the analogy from the essay that you are telling everyone to read is IKEA. So of course, that's just one winner of containerization. There are many, many other winners who won. But in that particular case, you've got this incredible technology, the container. The container allows us to ship goods much faster. It also allows us to unpack them. So, the longshoremen who pack and unpack things, they lose their ability to basically work. I mean, ports are almost all automated now. And some dude in Sweden, one dude in Sweden destroys the entire North Carolina furniture industry. That's the analogy. But there were many other companies like that ended up winning the containerization. Notice that none of us know a single company that makes containers. Let's pause on that. Nobody made money by betting on the company that's going to provide the containers themselves. You didn't win money by investing in shipping companies like Maersk. I mean, you probably did okay, but nobody walks away from the advent of containerization by being like, bro, Maersk, top 100 company in the world. That's a shipping company.
No, and I just want to underscore, in the piece, he talks about how, the company that revolutionized freight shipping with the first container ship was called Sealand. I as to your point, I'm doing finance. I've never heard of it. Never heard of this thing.
Yeah, exactly. But same with railroad companies. Now look, railway companies and railroad companies were the terrible investment. They went up and down, but you still made money, and they were great at printing a coupon to investors. So if they had a high dividend, usually because every single company on the planet had to pay to use the railroad. So they had cash flow. It's just that they were not the ones that productized what came out of the railroads, which was industrial revolution. And that's exactly the way I think we should think about AI. So a lot of people plowing into Magnificent Seven in the US, they're making a huge, terrible mistake. They're investing in railroads. They're investing in containers. And the truth is that there's an asymmetry of risk, Jacob. An asymmetry of risk is that, on one hand, the hyperscalers are almost exclusively domiciled in the United States of America. So the United States of America is bearing the brunt of the cost of the capex that requires to build this AI future. But the positive outcomes of AI are ubiquitously shared with the rest of the world. Because you can be a biotech company in Munich, you can be a robotics company in Shenzhen, you can be an insurance company in Taipei, and you can use AI tools that America has effectively gifted to the rest of the world. You can use them to boost your productivity. But only one country, almost exclusively, will bear the brunt of the inevitable capex collapse, which will come. It's the 11th commandment. So there's an asymmetry.
Well, let's pause on that. I think you're being a little unfair to China in that conversation.
Yeah, China too. China also has Baba, so Alibaba and Huawei. They also have some capex, but they are not overbuilding. And the reason for that is that the United States and China, so United States and China have decided, and by the way, they are also using hyperscalers as well, which is very interesting. Many domestic Chinese companies are refusing to use Alibaba's infrastructure because it's a competitor. And so they actually use American infrastructure, which is interesting. Now, yes, you're right. The Chinese are also building hyperscalers, but there are going to be far less data centers built in China because the way they are approaching AI is fundamentally different. And this is the second thing that I would want to bring to the table. It wasn't necessarily in the essay, but I fear that our obsession with LLM is fundamentally an obsession about AGI. So just to break it down, all the AI punters in America are basically telling us that it's a race to artificial general intelligence, something close to, Agent Smith in Matrix. And we're all trying to do that. We're all trying to get there. And I believe that that is ungettable because AI is not cognition, it's statistical inference. So we will never get to a point of artificial general intelligence, but okay, fine, I'm a Luddite, you can just make fun of me. But let's say I'm right. Let's say I'm correct. The large language models that we're all trying to implement are a path towards artificial general intelligence, and all the hyperscalers in America are basically trying to compete who's going to get there first. The Chinese are doing something different. They're focusing on productization of AI right now. So they're focusing on humanoid robots for like healthcare needs. They're focusing on factories. They're focusing on like specific consumer electronics that are enabled by AI. Specific products. They're focusing on chemistry, biology, new antibiotics. They're saying like AI is going to power different products, which means infinitely less data center capacity. Because you're not trying to solve for like, what's the question, what's the answer to what matters in the world? You know, I don't know how many of our listeners are fans of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but there's that computer that takes like 800 years to answer the question of like, what is the most important question in the world? And it spits out like a number, 47. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but anyways, doesn't matter. The point is, we in the West are trying to solve for this artificial intelligence, which requires massive amount of chips and data centers. We're going to end up overbuilding. I don't think the Chinese will do as well because they're focusing on more specific product-enabled uses of AI, which just requires a lot less data center capacity. And part of the reason for this is not that the Chinese have figured out something that they're smarter than us. It's a constraint. The US has not been as willing to share chips with China. Yes, Trump has kind of changed some of that, but the Chinese know that at any one time, a president of the United States of America may be a China hawk. They may have their supply of chips curtailed. So they've abandoned the effort effectively to reach AGI. They're focusing on much more locally enabled AI products that quite frankly don't even need access to AI cloud. They might be able to do some of their computation locally, more in a mobile capacity. In America, we've all gone for the AGI. And here's the problem with that. First, the first step to AGI is LLM. It doesn't seem to me that all these different LLMs are really needed. Like we have too many of them. And there is no reason why monopoly would help them. So with social media, if you, your grandmother, your buddy, your girlfriend are all on Facebook, you got to stay on Facebook. Facebook wins, it becomes a monopoly. LLMs are like internet browsers. Like right now, I'm using Chrome. I don't know what you're using, but you could be using Safari. You could be using Firefox. It doesn't matter. We don't all have to be on the same internet browsers. LLMs are exactly the same. You might want to use this one or that one, whatever. It doesn't matter. So there's no benefit in becoming a monopoly, which is why they want. The second is their product is so ubiquitous. Why would they be able to charge anything for it? And so if AGI, if we don't reach artificial intelligence, if we don't get there first, if you're not the company, if it's impossible to get there, if this is just going to be a better search app, all the data centers we built in America will effectively have to be like written off. Because how are you going to make any money off of it? And so I think that this is a fundamental problem that I don't think people understand. If LLM leads to just internet browsers, which are free, by the way, no one's paying for Firefox or Chrome. If LLMs end up being free and really just end up being a good tool for you and your wife to pick what to do in Lisbon when you have a day and a half, if that's what ends up happening, then we missed the boat on what is actual productization of this technology, whereas countries and companies that focus on simple problems and solving them with AI are going to create the products that are enabled with AI. And I think in the US, almost exclusively, we're focusing on that big problem, which is not even a problem. It's like a big goal of reaching AGI, which I don't think is going to ever be reached.
Yeah, so many acronyms. We're talking about LLMs leading to AGI. I also wanted to say, like for China, AGI is the CCP. The party is AGI. They don't want to turn things over to some kind of grand brain in general. And I have to think a little bit more about what you're saying with China, because I'm not sure it's that much of a layup, because the Chinese government has also been behind the wide scale deployment of infrastructure in a way that, in the way that what you're talking about, the hyperscalers are bearing the costs, like your Amazons, your Googles, or things like that. In some sense, the Chinese government is bearing the cost of that infrastructure build out in China, and has been for years. Like, they can deploy things at greater scale because they don't care about like local politics and some of these other things. Like, there's no number that's too big for them.
But they
In
have
the
less
context
access to
of it.
chips, though. And so,
Well, they certainly had less access to chips during the first Trump administration, and then the first Trump administration went after Huawei in a major way. And there were a couple of years there where I think China was struggling. But look at earlier this year when, aside from the NVIDIA wants to have a deal that they can export chips to China, and the U.S. government gets to take a 15% cut, like we can get into that whole status Peronis thing that Trump did. But the Chinese government has basically said, don't use NVIDIA chips,
yeah.
which is a clear signal that we're good. Like, we can make
No,
this
but
goes back
it's-
to a point you made years ago. Like, we're good enough. We can.
But they're not good
the
enough.
chips we have, like, they're good enough to
No,
do
no,
what we need to
let me
do. And in
explain.
2 years, they'll be like fine to do the things that you're talking about.
I actually
But fine,
think it's the
disagree.
opposite.
Go ahead for it.
Yeah, no, I think it's the opposite. I think the Chinese government agrees with me 100%. And they're like, AGI is stupid. No one's ever going to get to AGI. You don't need the most cutting edge chips doing most cutting edge calculations so your 16-year-old daughter can cheat on her essay. That's dumb.
Yeah.
That's what American AI productization is about. It's like the C-suite of America, the CEOs of America believe that there will be some sort of a prompt user interface where you'll be able to type in anything and replace all the humans in your organization. And the Chinese are just like, nah, we're not in that competition. So we're cool. Don't buy NVIDIA chips. Because in China, the AI story is just being deployed differently. It's like, I want a robot that does what a nurse would do. And that does not require the number of calculations that you require for a 16-year-old to write a fake essay. This is the funny thing, Jacob. This is the hilarious thing. When you have a finite problem, it requires a finite solution that, it requires some computation, but not as much as what we're trying to do in America. So there's two completely different philosophies in China and America. In America, we've decided to replace humans. So that's the AGI. There's a prompt. The prompt can answer anything, from a business strategy to creating a chart. Whereas the Chinese are like, that's crazy. I'm going to build a product, like this one product that does this one thing. And so it just requires a lot less CapEx infrastructure for that deployment of AI. In fact, many of those calculations, as I said, can be born locally. And this is a huge risk, Jacob. Because in 5 years, if large language models like ChatGPT do not become AGI, if we end up having just a really cool search thing, you'll be able to carry that computation on an advanced phone. That's what I mean. If AI becomes more mobile or local, all these data centers we've built in the US are going to effectively be turned into pickleball courts. So let me give you, by the way, let me step back a little bit, because that might be a confusing point. If I can use an analogy like the one from the essay. When I was...
And then I want to say it back at you, because I think we're actually saying the same thing from a different angle, but go, and then I'll...
By the way, I don't really care about the US-China thing. I really care about, is AI going to matter the way people think? Just because you can have incredible computation doesn't mean that it will be marketable. Because if you just created an autistic human, I'm not sure that's helpful. You haven't replaced humanity. And I think that's where we're headed. But let me give you an analogy that might be helpful, because I think this is something that most of our listeners will know. I grew up in the 80s and 90s. I played a lot of computer games in the 90s, a lot. I'm sure people are shocked that I'm a nerd. But yes, so I played a lot of computer games in the 1990s. And when I was a teenager in the 90s, I would often pause and think to myself, man, I can't wait to have kids and be in my 40s. Because I bet that, unlike my dad, who's sitting on the couch smoking cigarettes and watching sports like a good Serbian father would, I bet you that when I'm in my 40s and my kids are in their teens, I'm going to play computer games with them. Because can you imagine what computer games are going to look like in the 2020s? Like this would come to me often. I remember sitting there playing some crazy computer game. The graphics just came out. I just installed Voodoo 2 graphic card, which ended up being the building blocks
Yeah.
of AI.
Yeah.
And I'm just so stoked about this, like the future. So fast forward, it's 2025. I have kids who are teenagers. What do they play? They play computer games I would have not touched. Roblox, Minecraft. The graphics is incredibly disgusting. Why? Did we go back in time? Did we enter some dark age of computational power? No. What we've entered is a world where mobility and online gameplay are favored by the consumer. So my 12-year-old kid, he doesn't want to play NBA 2K with dad. He's like, yeah, dad, graphics are cool, but all my friends are on Roblox. And I can play it on an iPad. I can play it on a phone. It's mobilely accessible. And so what ended up happening, Jacob, and this is very important for people to listen to, is yes, our computer advancement got to a point where you can play GTA 5 and it looks absolutely unbelievable. But more people want to play Roblox and Minecraft because it's just more usable. It is where the demand is. So just because you have all the computational capability in the world doesn't mean that you're going to be able to productize it. And so that's my shock that I'm a 43-year-old man with kids and the computer games they play are worse than what I played in the 90s, man. It's Prince of Persia stuff out there. And people think that's good. And I think the same thing is we're walking into the same buzzsaw with this AI thing. If we do not create a human replacement, I'm going to tell you, a lot of those data centers are going to be turned into pickleball courts because the AI that we will reach will be just good enough. I think a lot of it will be accessible from a phone locally, maybe accessing the AI cloud here and there. Maybe, yes, self-driving cars will need a little bit more of that AI cloud infrastructure. There'll be ways to use some of it, but we're building the AI cloud data center infrastructure as if we're going to have a bunch of Jacobs and Markos running around in that sphere, but we're going to have actual replacement for humans. And I don't think that's where this is headed. I think this is headed towards, a little bit of a cool, useful tool. I think we're all going to have an AI EA, which was going to take some power. Yes. I think we're all going to have some tools for ourselves, but we're not going to be replacing. So your conversation this morning, which we've all had with a friend, what are my kids going to do? They're going to learn to use some AI tools to do the job we do today. And that's it. They're not going to be replaced. And that means there's a huge CapEx bubble being built by the hyperscalers.
Yeah, that's interesting because and I want to go back to what you said because U.S., China, different philosophies and things like that. I think you're right that certainly we're probably not going to get AGI in the next 5 years. Or 10 years. Like if that's the time horizon, I assume that most experts would agree with that, even the ones that are talking out there. I think that's all the marketing sheen. I think that is what people say in order to generate marketing. And the thing about this essay is basically all of those will fail. They will go out of business. Like if somebody figures it out, okay, fine. Like they'll do great, but that's probably going to fail. One of the most interesting statistics from the essay that he sort of brings up is that look at the share of household spending on food and clothing over the last 100 years, roughly. It went from 55% of household spending to 16%. And that's because we got so much better at growing food and manufacturing things. And so who really benefited from that? Yes, like there were certain companies that if you're a really good stock picker, you could have figured out. But who benefited was the consumer. The consumer had more time. The consumer had more money. The consumer consumed more things and didn't have to throw all of this money that they used to on just food and clothing, and they could go do other things. And his point is that something similar is going to happen with AI in that knowledge intensive services, to your point, like that's the product, are going to get cheaper. And so consumers will buy more knowledge intensive services. The services that still require person to person interaction will actually probably get more expensive and take up a greater share of household spending. But things like your CPA, even your doctor, like all these other things, that will all get a lot less expensive because of the advances that AI are creating. And so you can pick some winners. Like there will be an IKEA of AI, the one that figures out, oh, there's containerization. I can make this furniture really cheap and I can serve meatballs in the store and people will come get it. Like, okay, like do that with your taxes or something like that. So there'll be a company that does that. But the real benefiter is the consumer, and that the consumer will pay less prices for things like medical care, education, professional advice, and things like that. And that's where it sort of stops for a second. Because I think you're right. If the response to the friend is no, like your children will just interact with AI tools in order to do the same types of jobs that we're doing right now. But the difference is going to be who knows how to use AI, who doesn't know how to use AI, and all these other things. And the last thing I'll just say before I know you probably want to jump back in, is that the reason I think the China thing is interesting is because I think China's first there. Like, I take your point on they don't have this marketing AGI gloss. Like, they're not going for that. They are productized. They're already doing this. And they're doing it on the factory floor. They're doing it with medicine. They're doing it with everything. Whereas in the United States, like, we're running around building data centers because of, we think there's going to be AGI. And meanwhile, medical care, education, the prices for all these things are going up. Like, we're not seeing any sort of...
Stop there for a second.
Yeah, stop
because
there.
that's no, because that's brilliant. We're all here building data centers because we're trying to go for AGI. Why? Because we've allowed, like, effectively tech companies to monopolize where the capital for AI build out goes. In China, consumer electronic company is like, hey, I'm going to use AI to enable a drone. In America, where like 50% of the stock market is tech companies, every nail needs a hammer, which means every new technology needs, like, a website, needs a tech company to enable it, which is stupid. I actually don't think that there will be much tech company winners out of AI. In fact, if you want to look at where there's going to be disruption, it's going to be all the SaaS businesses. Like, why, that's who's going to lose all their jobs. But I think the IKEAs, by the way, shipping containers led to furniture. What? That's what listeners of this podcast should be thinking about. A bunch of code in an AI cloud infrastructure is going to lead to a new antibiotic, synthetic antibiotic. It's going to lead to a new material for new heart valves. It's going to lead to a new drone that follows you around weirdly and records everything you do, so you can report to your spouse where you actually went. Like, shit like that is where I think AI is going. So, like, everyone's thinking, oh, AI. In America, it's dominated by the tech companies. And here's the truth. They want us to think that we need more code because that's what they do for a living. So we've been convinced in this country that you need to give them the money so they can build with their buddies who build chips. So there's a lot of this, like, a lot of this sort of symbiotic relationship between chip companies and companies, hyperscalers. They're effectively feeding one another in a circular fashion. Oh, well, I need more chips. Oh, of course you do. You need more data centers, because they've convinced everybody in this country that AI is about code, that it's about user interface. It's about a large language model like ChatGPT. Oh, no, I don't want to use ChatGPT. I want to use Gronk. Oh, no, I don't want to use Gronk. I want to use something else, right? That's what we're all talking here. We're obsessed about it from a perspective. Well, for the last 30 years in this country, it's all about software. It's been about tech companies. It's been about Silicon Valley and weird, nerdy dudes wearing way too tight t-shirts and hoodies. And the rest of the world is like, well, no, I mean, I want to use AI to create a new drug. I want to use AI to do something else. And so that's why we're so obsessed about AGI. We're obsessed about it, Jacob, because it's a way to justify spending more in the ecosystem that's been the winner in this country for 30 years. And by the way, this is a story as old as time. The reason that incumbents always get destroyed by a new technology is because they think in incumbent terms. So when they see a nail, they're the hammer, right? They see a new technology. Wow, cool. This is going to be about more code. And I think that the burden that America has is that the Silicon Valley cabal is so strong politically, economically, and they're directing all this capital into this LLMs and then finally AGI future that I don't think is going to exist. Whereas the rest of the world is just not burdened by that because they have no tech companies. All their tech companies got destroyed. So they're like, oh, cool. Well, we'll just hire space in Amazon's AI cloud infrastructure. We'll have to pay the American hyperscalers because they got there first. God bless them. They're the railroad companies. I'm going to pay for access to your digital railroad. And then I'm going to do something cool with that. I'm going to create a new consumer electronic drone. I'm going to create a new, laser tool for surgeries. I'm going to create a new diagnostic tool for radiology. And whereas here in America, all we're doing is like, well, we need another LLM system. Oh, you know what? You don't want to use Gronk, man. Gronk is like conservative. You want to use ChatGPT. And it's just, I think to me, that is the wrong way to think about AI. And so there's a symmetry of risk. Everyone thinks the biggest winner of AI is going to be America. I think it's going to actually end up, in a way, what America has done is it's decided to magnanimously share this technology with the rest of the world, but it's going to bear the brunt of building the railroads, which is a capital-intensive enterprise, which means that if those capital-intensive companies, if the hyperscalers don't productize and monetize AI, if they end up just being railroad companies, oh boy, there's going to be a problem.
Well, no, and I don't know if I agree with that last part, but that's part of what he says. I mean, so he talks about how the lack of dynamism is going to allow the entrenched companies to entrench themselves even harder, and that eventually they're going to have to start controlling costs. Like, we're not in that phase yet. Like right now, it's $1 billion for an engineer, data centers all over the place. But eventually, R&D spending will get redirected from product and process innovation towards fruitless attempts to find ways to extend the current paradigm. And companies will frame this as a drive to win. They'll frame it as AGI that's coming to save the world, but it's really like they're going to be terrified of losing their position. So the incumbents don't go away, but the railroads haven't gone away. You could have, you could have held railroad stocks for the last 120 years,
100%.
But they're gonna go in a different direction.
And listen, Warren Buffett made billions investing in railroad companies, but what you're describing, Jacob, is a transformation of America's innovation technology into a utility.
Yes.
So like, yes, Amazon becomes a critical utility for the rest of the world. And again, I'm not saying you should sell Magnificent Seven stocks. They become ubiquitous for the rest of humanity. They're not exciting. It's like when Warren Buffett bought, like, I don't know, some Pacific Railroad. People were like, oh, no, he was just like, look, man, they got high dividends. I'm just going to clip my coupon. Because you got to move stuff, and
Compound,
similarly,
baby.
And similarly with Amazon, you're going to be like, hey, man, it's 2074. Amazon still exists. It still provides the AI infrastructure upon which everything else. But the new Amazons, the new Googles, the new unicorns, the new exciting companies we're going to really care about are going to be those that productize this. And I just don't think it's going to be a chat bot or LLM or any of that stuff. It's going to be actual products in the physical space, in medicine, in health insurance, in finance that are AI enabled. And yes, every one of these businesses, by the way, Jacob, will have to give Amazon a little payment.
Yep.
But yeah, and if you're sitting there, you'll be like, well, shit, I want to own Amazon then. I'm like, yeah, but you don't get excited about owning like AT&T. It's there. You don't get excited about owning like a railroad or like a highway company. They're just there. They give you a dividend. They're cool.
Yeah, Chase Taylor was on my podcast a couple weeks ago, and he did a great thought piece on the Grid recently, and he had ChatGPT ironically create a cover for it, and it was Jeff Bezos and Elon and all these others as the robber barons of the 1880s and 1890s. Like, those are the robber barons, and they will go to the moon and do whatever else they want on their spare time.
But they won't innovate. This is the thing.
No.
They'll be extremely wealthy. God bless them. They have gifted the world AI. I'm not denigrating their effort. I'm just saying this is normal. And by the way, if our listeners want to read a book about this, how every single new technology and CapEx revolution ended in tears and incumbents never win twice. They never win twice. Engines that move markets. I've said it before. I'll say it again. Engines that move markets is a great book about this. It goes from canals to the internet revolution. And it shows that in each and every new technology, the incumbents effectively stop innovating and become kind of like utilities. They're like, okay, cool, we're just going to provide this. It's the IKEAs of the world, the companies that build on top of that, Microsoft, that builds on top of the semiconductor revolution. They are the ones that end up productizing and thinking beyond the scope. So the tech companies in America just can't stop thinking in terms of software, in terms of software as a solution. So they're trying to solve this by telling us, you'll have to pay us $100 a month for access to ChatGPT. And I'm like, why? I'll just go to Gronk. Or I'll go to some other, like LLMs are going to be like ubiquitous. You're going to have 1,000 LLMs. Nobody pays for their internet browser. You don't pay for Firefox. You don't pay for Explorer. You don't pay for Blink. You don't pay for any of these, for Safari. They're just there.
No,
And
but
I
you
think,
pay for your access to the internet, and you pay based on how much data you're
that's fine.
transmitting through.
But
and
you're
then
describing
the
a
ISPs are going to
utility.
throttle you and everything.
No, but you're describing a utility, Jacob. That's the
yeah,
point.
I know. Yeah,
That's great. That's great. That's great. But that's all it is.
yeah. The second part of this is I want to bring it back to the containerization thing for a second, just because like we mentioned IKEA, but there were companies that failed to see what was coming, and so companies like Sears. Does Gen Z even know what a Sears is, or a Woolworth, or I think Macy's got rescued back in the day, but these were companies that maybe should have done what IKEA did and didn't because they failed to see what was coming. There's also a great line in the article that talks about how in North Carolina, which was at one point the furniture capital of the world, furniture makers tried to compete with IKEA by importing cheap pieces from China, and they ended up being replaced by their suppliers. This is for Pokemon fan. Let's just throw out that President Trump, effective next week, has imposed new tariffs on imported furniture and wood products because he wants to make furniture in America again. So I'm just pointing out that I don't think the White House has any clue what's going on here. I think their hodgepodge of policy is not appreciating any of the things that we're talking about. They're spinning out. It's these big U.S. tech companies that are seeing what is coming and entrenching themselves and doing the things that are moving forward. But then, as we have our last 20 or our last 10 or 15 minutes, Marko, I mean, like in some sense, this part of the conversation, at least for me, is about developing ideas. I don't know that I feel super strongly about what I'm about to say. Is the answer just energy then? Because we're going to need a lot of energy. We're going to need more energy and electricity than we have, at least in the United States, on the grid right now, to even do the things that we're talking about with productization. Like, is that just, I don't know. Like, all roads seem to be going back to me. I look at the grid, I look at power, I look at energy. Like something to me has to give here. And it seems to me like that's the bottleneck, but I don't know if I'm being too simplistic. I don't know if that's how you're seeing it.
Well, I would say both yes and then no. Because, the Chinese believe that electrification is everything. They want to reduce imported oil. They want to shift over to nuclear, to alternative. Everything that they can just do domestically, natively, they want to do.
And they are. They're doing it remarkably well.
Yes. And so when people think about EVs, in the Western world, it's seen as like, oh man, like it's like just kind of liberal, like you're just a tree hugger. In China, it's national security. The reason they want to move away from the internal combustion engine is they don't have oil domestically, and they're always going to be vulnerable on import of gasoline. So I do think that there's an element here where we're going to need more electricity. But I also think that if I'm right and we don't get to AGI and LLMs have peaked, or are close to being peaked. By the way, ChatGPT 5 version, everybody knows, kind of sucks. Like, oh, no, don't worry about it. It'll get better. Well, why did it suddenly not get better? There's all sorts of problems with why using statistical inference to surf all of humanity that's on the internet will produce stupid results. Like that's a question we need to unpack. That will take probably an hour, which we don't have. But the point is that if I'm right and AGI doesn't get achieved and LLMs peak, then maybe the build out we have of data centers and a lot of these charts you're seeing, by the way, Jacob, like where data centers require 10% of all electricity generated in America from current 3, I think that might actually be overstated. So there could be a crash over the next 5 years. Not could be. There probably will be a crash where we also overbuild electricity. So there will be an initial phase where we all panic and say, oh my God, to get to AGI, we're going to need 20% of electricity geared towards data centers. We need to build electricity utilities. And then at some point where we don't achieve it, and we realize that a lot of this computation can be done locally on just better chips on our phones, I think we're going to realize that we don't need as much electricity as we think. So that's why I say it's both yes and a no.
Somebody I knew when I was first transitioning from geopolitics more into finance, somebody once told me you should never short fat people. And I think it sort of applies here because I think because even if like everything you say is true, right? Baby boomer in their basement is still going to be on ChatGPT typing all these things in. You can't stop them from using the data in that sense. So
True.
unless you're going to have a government that says you're not
No.
allowed to engage
Let
here,
me explain what I mean. Let me explain what I mean. First of all, yes, we need more electricity, correct. But no, we're not going to be in a world where we're suddenly like, there's electricity wars. In other words, electricity demand from computation will increase. And then I think we're going to achieve a certain level of electricity use that just is enough. We're not going to be starved from energy because of AI. I don't think we're ever going to be, because we're not going to achieve AGI. And that comes down to like, we've got the last like 4 or whatever, 10 minutes. And so we need, at some point, one of us needs to say it, which you kind of inferred it, which is AGI is a marketing tool. And it's a marketing tool. And I'll be very crass. If you're one of these tech bros, what you're doing is you're trying to raise hundreds of billions of dollars from institutional investors around the world who grew up investing in airport parking lots. Just to be very clear, they have no idea what you're talking. So you go into a room in one of these sovereign wealth funds and you're like, I am going to get us to artificial intelligence first, and then it will enslave us all. But because you have a little bit of an allocation to my AGI, you'll be okay. And I know this sounds crazy, but literally people are buying seats on a rocket to take us out of a dying Earth. That's what this is. Literally, tech bros walk into your office and they tell you this will end humanity most likely. It will most likely enslave us. But listen, if you invest in it, at least you'll have a little bit of that future overlord in your portfolio. And so it's the kind of it's almost like a hedge against a left tail event. This is part of marketing. So that's the first issue. That's why guys like Sam Altman, who are, running all this stuff, they're not denying that it could end humanity. They're like concerned. Oh my God, I'm concerned. They're all like, I'm concerned. Well, why are you building it then? Now, let me explain. So that's the first issue. The second part of this is, why are we not going to achieve AGI? Because AI is not cognition, people. Like this is not, Marko Papic has 3 degrees in political science. So feel free to just ignore everything I say. But when I talk to AI experts, which I have to for my day job, it's like, no, it's statistical inference. Yeah, it's getting better at connecting the dots, but he has no idea what the dots are. No idea. Zero idea. And this is not cognition. It's not actual thinking. This is something that the Chinese just figured out because they're like literal and objective. And they were like, okay, cool. Like whatever. LLMs are kind of fun, but we're going to go here and create a robot that knows how to solve this task. And Americans are like, no, it's cognition. Yeah, because you've been sold snake oil, guys. And we're all investing into these data centers thinking that, but when the AGI comes, it's going to require all this food to eat. So we got to prepare the food. If AGI never comes, we're just going to have this food rotting. And that's why I say data centers in 2030s will be turned into pickleball courts. Not all of them. To your point, current electricity use is lower than future electricity use. I agree, Jacob. I agree. But it's not going to be because we've discovered this new entity. Because look, at the end of the day, what these models are using as input is just bullshit on the internet. And yeah, it's all the books and all this stuff. But like, you know what? It's not great.
And we've talked about the slop, the never-ending slop circle. I think the place where you and I are differing, and this because I haven't done the work on this particular thing yet, but it seems to me like we can grant what you said about AGI, but because I think eventually the productization that you talked about of AI is going to happen in the United States. Like the marketing stuff will go away, the AGI companies will mostly fail, and we'll be left with the productization. And I'm saying I think that demand will actually still be enough to satisfy the data centers. And I think what you're saying is no, we're outbuilding the demand even for the ideal productization part of what you're talking about.
Yeah,
that's I think where there's a delta between you and me.
Well, I just think
I'm not there yet.
I think time will say. But I will say that every capex boom, we always overbuild. We always do too many canals. We
That's
do
true.
too many railroads, and then they start competing. Like one of the problems with railroads is that people were like, "Oh, we need a railroad connecting Chicago with Boston," and it's like cool. And they're like 6 companies build railroads between Chicago and Boston, and it's like, well, actually, we just need one trunk. Like we don't need like
Yeah.
6. And similarly here, like, look. But anyways, doesn't matter. The point is, what I think is interesting is that I haven't really seen, other than in defense and military technology, I'm yet to see focus in the US be on productization of AI-enabled things. And of course, that's a very sweeping statement. I don't professionally invest in venture. That's not what I do. It's kind of a side issue. I'm sure that someone listening to this is like, I'm a professional VC investor. I've invested in 7 of these. I just think that it's a philosophical issue. It's more broadly. In America, we're all trying to create this new superhuman, super entity. And I think in the rest of the world, they're just so far behind us on chips. They're so far behind us on big tech that they're like, you know what? I'm just going to focus on solving this one problem. And what ends up happening is those little problems create better products. And that's where we're going to be probably next 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, they're behind us on the cloud. Like we're behind on chips. Like if we lost access to South Korea and Taiwan and some of these other places, like yes, we do some of the design, but
Well, we do all the design. Wait, hold on a second. No, America's ahead on design of all the chips, though, right?
yeah, but if you design a chip in the forest and you can't get it made in Taiwan and back to
Okay,
your
fair.
market, did you really design a chip? Like the knockoffs are getting closer and closer, and the companies that are at the cutting edge
fair.
are not American companies. So like, I mean, Nvidia is there, but we're still in a TSMC, even Samsung.
I see your
world
point.
today,
Yeah. And TSMC uses ASML's machines to got it. That's fair. That's fair. I do think design obviously dominates in America, crushes it in that, and it is what it is. But I think that it's almost making us go towards a route of innovation that could be a dead end. I think that's a good way to end this. Like AGI might be a dead end, right?
Well, yeah, and I've even actually been saying to clients that I've spoken to in the last couple of weeks, because everybody's focused on ChatGPT or this LLM, to your point, and the share of business spending on internal models is still minuscule compared to what people are spending on ChatGPT and everything else. But I think the real winners here are the ones who are going to create internal models and then protect. And with this, we've alluded to this before, but it's like protect your data, hive it off from the rest of the world so that the other LLMs can't get it. Create your own internal, secure, proprietary models that spit out the insights or things for you. And if you can do that, you will be IKEA. And if you don't do that, you will be Sears. And it's all about like, do you have the foresight to build those sorts of things? And that's why I go back to energy, because to do that and to not like have to give Amazon a 30% cut of what you're talking about, you've got to somehow be self-sustaining. You've got to, I mean, and your point about localization, I haven't done enough work on that. I don't even know if that's truly possible at the scale that we're talking about. If you can, you should be doing that. I know that you can localize energy and that maybe you can like have some bargaining power with the big FANG companies. If you can say, well, like I have all this energy storage, like I've got batteries and solar and wind and all this other stuff that I installed on my campus. So I'll give you some energy and you give me some data processing power and we're good. Like we can sort of make a trade that way. But anyway, the point being like, it's about use of AI by companies creating internal models rather than, ChatGPT is going to take over my portfolio and make 10x. Like there's all those stories out there which are not real.
Yeah, and I think at the end we need to ask ourselves, what is innovation and ingenuity? What actually makes money? And oftentimes it's not data driven. I think moneyballization can only go so far. I'm a huge fan of Nate Silver. But he would be the first in all of his books to say that Moneyball went too far. There's this view that if you just have the data, you can use it to manipulate and you can be the Oakland A's who never won a World Series. I always remind people who like love to Moneyball stuff. I love that quote, which is misattributed to Henry Ford, where he says, if I had asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said they want a faster horse. Now it's misattributed to Henry Ford, but like it's a great point. Like, all the data in the world is just knowledge that has been uttered and spoken in the past. Where innovation comes. Nice.
What the fuck?
What is that? AC/DC.
For
Let's
some reason,
go.
my computer just started playing Thunderstruck. I have no clue what just happened. Apparently, AGI did not like what I was saying.
Well, what I was saying, I think what I was saying, AGI's like, shut
Okay.
up, listen to AC/DC. No, I just think that, like, you know, what I want to conclude with is just that, look, saying that, well, he has access to all the humanities knowledge, bro, like all of humanities knowledge. I'm like, yeah, I'm not interested in that. Because true innovation and true ingenuity actually comes from non-data driven. And there's that great scene in one of the movies about, you know, Jobs, where he and Wozniak are arguing in the garage. And Wozniak says, developers want portals on the motherboard. Like, they want to be able to add a floppy disk. They want to be able to add and expand. He keeps saying, like, developers. No, he actually uses a different word for people buying computers in the 1980s, which was, they were like, what's the word for the people who were like modding computers? They were not developers, they were enthusiasts, you know, like, and Jobs says, I don't care. No portals, none, because I want a stay-at-home mom to buy my computer, not your fellow nerds. You know, and it's that kind of visionary views that are just not data-driven. They actually ignore what clients want. They ignore what data tells you should do. They go against the grain. And I think the problem with AGI, which is what we think we get, is that it's going to be intelligent because it has all of humanity and all the knowledge of humanity that's ever been done behind it. I don't think that's intelligence. I think that's just empirics.
I'm glad you're finally coming around to my eternal point that humanity is stupid and that everybody is a moron. I'll just close on this. What really makes money? What really makes money is two cousins who decide to podcast together. Try and replicate that, AGI. Anything else you want to say to the listeners before we say bye, Marko?
I think that's good. I'm good with that.
I think that's a good end.